Snow fell all that afternoon, light as breath and as endless as old stories, and the flakes seemed to lose themselves in the white of the wedding cloak that lay around the queen's shoulders. She stood in the god's wood beneath a sky that promised more winter, her gloved fingers following the grooves of the heart tree's bark as if reading a language cut in blood that she did not yet speak. The face carved in the weirwood watched with blind red eyes. The pools were rimmed with ice, the iron smell of the water faint at the edge of the cold. Every sound in that place had been muffled by snow. Men's voices, the creak of taut leather, the scrape of boots on stone. Only the ravens muttered with their dry-throated persistence, unsettled by the heat press of dragons somewhere beyond the walls. She had been told what to wear and what to say by those who knew the customs of this land. Sansa had chosen the cloak, white fox edged with gray, the work of deft needlewomen who whispered and gossiped as they stitched, moving their hands as if they sewed new alliances into fur. Tyrion had helped with the words, mastering the plain music of the northern promises so that nothing in them could be taken for cunning. Missandei stood nearby with her small hands folded and her expression earnest, as always intent upon learning a new pattern of things. The queen's breath left her in little clouds. In the absence of heat, she seemed brighter for the cold, a small flame cupped between black trees. Her hair, silver as frost on iron, had been braided with red ribbons. Red for the heart tree, red for the blood of houses made whole or sundered. When he came, the winter air shifted around the shape of him, not warmer. He had always carried winter with him, but steadier, a banked ember under ash that warmed by patience. Jon Aegon, he had consented to try on the name a day before when they rehearsed what would be said, wore a heavy cloak of black and gray that fell almost to his heels. His wolf brooch was dulled by snow. A small drift had made a crown of his shoulder. His mouth was set in that serious line that meant he was afraid but refused the fear. He had never liked ceremony, nor, she believed, had he ever sought to be watched. Yet he moved into the space they had prepared for him, boots careful on the frozen path, and the lords and ladies who had come to see this thing done pulled their breath through their teeth as if pulling thread. Names and bloodlines hung in the air, each syllable heavy with its own winter. They stood facing each other, too close and not close enough, and the gods would waited. The words came from the old man whom Sansa had brought from a village so small it had not been on any map. The man's beard was ice-white and clotted with snow he had not bothered to shake free. His hands looked like roots. He asked for truth and they gave it. "I am Daenerys of the House Targaryen," she said, and her voice was clear. The north wind tried to bruise it, but she did not let it. "I am Jon of the House Stark," he said. He had promised himself and her that he would not speak the other name unless it needed to be spoken, and the agreement had been like the sliding of a blade into a sheath. "Aegon of the House Targaryen," he added after that small pause, honoring the truth they had uncovered and set inside their intentions. "By my father's blood." The pause, the pivot, the double naming drew a ripple through the crowd, and she felt the ripple as a brief tremor under her skin. Ice may crack along its stress lines long before it breaks. Best to know where it is thin. The vows had been chosen for their plainness. They were not the vows of the South with their braids and scrolls and kissings of rings shining with 1,000 winters' work of gold. Nor were they the vows she had been made to speak to a man who had called himself Khal. Vows that had bound her to a language and a sea of grass which she had learned because she had to or be no one and nowhere. These were neither a conqueror's vows nor a captive's vows. The old man had asked, "Will you be his shield and he yours, in summer and snow?" And she had answered, "I will." He asked, "Will you share bread and fire and face all enemies as one?" And they said together, "As one." He asked, "Do you come of your own will?" And her yes and his yes rose in two small clouds into the still air and vanished. And yet the sound of them clung to stone as smoke will cling to wool. The old man nodded as if he were nodding to the heart tree and the dead at its roots. And he laid his wrinkled hand first upon Jon's head, then upon hers. "As the living unite against the dead," he said, not as part of any rite she knew, but as if compelled to put a name to the hour, "so let this thing be done." She removed the white fox cloak and set it across Jon's shoulders. the black taking the white as winter takes what it wants. He in turn brought a cloak of black wool lined with soft red and settled it on her shoulders, his hands careful on the line of her collarbone. His breath a rhythm she had learned now as she had learned flight and fear. They did not kiss in the gods would. The old man did not ask them to. The heart tree did not require it. They stood together looking into each other, and in the small movement of his mouth, she saw not a smile so much as a smoothing of a life's rough grain. It was enough. The old man lifted his hands, every finger a twig. "It is done," he said to the tree and the gods and the watching people, and the ravens shut up for the space of one heartbeat as if they too had been waiting upon that permission. Then they began to speak again, all the small gossip of their black gathering. When they stepped from the gods wood back into the courtyards, winter came beaked and winged and alive, a flurry that pulled and tugged with clever hands. The air smelled of dragon, as Drogon and Regal shifted in the field beyond the curtain wall. Snow hissed and melted upon the scales. The tea took it. Viserion, still bright, still breathing, stood farthest away, his pale eyes reading the seam between day and night. The large beasts were quiet, heads lifted like banners that no wind could turn entirely as it willed. The men at the gate could not keep from looking up at every sudden scuffle of snow. The dragons had learned the shape of this castle and were learning its permissions. Once Drogon had set a careless foot too close to a crenel and half a dozen stones had tumbled. But now he folded his strength tight when he moved among the walls, tail a slow line in the snow like a draft of ink waving on paper. The great hall took them in, and the fire took them too, slipping itself into their cloaks and hair, breathing the scent of resin and fat and burned oak. It was a long hall with its ceilings blackened by old feasts, and when it filled with the people who would live through whatever came next, it no longer felt as if it belonged to any dead man, however much the dead had done to build it. Sansa guided everything with a hand so invisible that even those who watched closely could not see her touch it. She had made this feast because it was winter and because it was marriage and because it was wise to fill men's mouths with stew and hot drink before asking them to shape new oaths. Her face in the firelight was not cold precisely, but it was a map of distances. She had hung a lamp above every place of honor, and the lamps made small countries of warmth on the table, little spheres where things were clearer and nearer than the storm outside. Their seats were carved with the same wolves that ran along every beam. Wolves everywhere, thought Daenerys, and dragons at the door. Between them on the high table sat Tyrion with his cup and page of notes written in his painfully neat hand. Missandei with her small knife and the joy of learning how the north salted turnips. Davos with a look of contentment at any roof that did not leak and any soup that did not lie. And Bran with eyes that seemed to watch from farther away than the farthest of mountain lines, like a man who had climbed too high and become too aware of the curve of the world and how easy it is to fall. Arya ghosted in and out like a rumor with a face. She drank nothing stronger than the thin, fierce northern ale. She sat sometimes and sometimes she did not, and always there was the shape of a smile somewhere near her mouth when she looked toward them both, as if she could not quite help approving that which she had not expected to approve. The hall smelled of onion and venison and wet wool and pine. It sounded like men relieved to work at chewing rather than at thinking. Yet even when the queen laughed, quietly, because this was not a woman who had been taught to laugh easily, and even when Jon allowed himself to be pulled into the warmth of Davos's story about a seal, fear kept taking its small bites of the room. House Manderley had sent a swan made of flour and sugared fat that gleamed like a snowy ship and peeled away into pastry when Davos carved it. House Mormont had sent salt hams and sharp women with eyes that measured and weighed. The Glovers had come, stiff as trees braced for an equinoctial wind. Around the walls stood men in leather and fur, boys who had never seen a dragon before this week and yet had turned out their pockets to buy little wooden ones in the yard that an old carver made from bleached drift. A pack of the household's wolfish dogs slept by the hearth, as calm in the face of scaled behemoths as boys in their father's lap. Perhaps that was the inevitable arrogance of beasts who had never seen themselves in gold or heard songs made for them, only commands and greetings spoken in a language older than the first spear. They had agreed to be seen eating the same bread and talking with the same mouths so that all men might see their union as a fact and not as a rumor. Daenerys made herself eat even when her stomach fluttered with the new shape of the day. She made herself listen to the man from a long bend in the White Knife, who spoke of a village where foxes had come so near the doors you could pluck their whiskers if you had a mind. She made herself ask how grain was moving through the winter and how old men kept their breath in that other town where the houses were low and roofed with sod. She had learned to be a queen in places where the sky was a bowl of heat that never cooled. She had learned to rule on a saddle, and then on a ship that heaved and crawled like a stubborn creature. The hall with its beams and trusted shadows was a new page. She could not presume all languages she had learned would translate. "It is not so very different," Tyrion murmured, reading the direction of her glance without difficulty, as he tended to do. "People are themselves no matter what their roofs are built of." "The roofs here seem to have teeth," she answered, arranging her mouth around a smile she mostly meant. She had always thought the maester's ravens were the black tongues of houses, how they flew and made words from hunger and fear. Here the very roofs had teeth that clicked hidden in the ice. "They creak when they are tired." "It is the snow you hear," Tyrion said. "Snow has ambitions of its own." Jon, meanwhile, sat with the posture of a man who expected punishment at any moment for daring to be comfortable. He had never liked the high seat. It was in him to seek the edge of any room where a wall could be put to his back and a door kept in his eye. He watched the men who would not meet her gaze and the men who would not meet his, and the men who had never learned to hide what they thought. He listened to Davos's tale and laughed when it warranted laughter and covered her hand in a place where no one could see it so that some small tremor in her pulse steadied. And when the cup passed and the hall quieted and he rose to speak, he did not look toward Sansa for approval or toward Tyrion for permission. He looked at the hall and spoke as if to a man who stood on the far ridge with a horn at his lips. It was a voice that came from a place before all this. "You know me," he said. He did not add, "I hope you know me. You know my mother was your lord's sister, and that I ran under these beams like a boy who did not know which door led where. You know I left and that I came back to you as a man who had seen things he did not know how to believe. You know what is coming for us." He had never been an orator. He had the habit of sentences stripped down to their bones. He did not name the dead with titles. He did not try to burn men's fear down. He laid it before them like a map and pointed at the places where it could be made to serve them. He spoke of the night to come, and of the light they had, light breathed by the beasts beyond the walls, light the color of that cloak he had put on her shoulders. He spoke of the truth of his name, which had been in rooms and in the air for days now like the smell of a new soap, and he did not ask them what they wanted to do with it. He told them what it required of him. "I will not be a king to the dead," he said, the words clipped, the knuckles of his left hand briefly white on the edge of the table. "I will not let one winter take all summers." They drank for that. Men drank for relief and to stop their hands and to start their tongues and for the pleasure of forgetting their debts for the space of a song. Daenerys watched the cup move like a star that drew a small orbit around the hall and then returned to them. When it was placed before her, she stood to a murmur of benches and plates, and the silence that lay down next was different from the silence the old man's hand had made in the godswood. This one was less reverent, more curious. She had become in their mouths and their eyes something between a creature and a story. Stories are always offered a little silence. "I came here with my name," she said, "and I came with my dragons. I did not come for a throne. I came because I was asked, and because my dragons cannot love me rightly if I tell them to fly away from fear." Men looked at the beasts beyond the walls. The dragons felt the gaze and shifted. "In the places I have ruled," she continued, "I have asked men to be more than they were told they could be. I have asked them to stand and be counted even if no one had ever counted them. I ask that again. Stand. Be counted. Tell me what we lack and I will bring it. Tell me who is hungry and I will feed them. Tell me where the cold is breaking the children and I will rebuild that roof, and not with teeth. Tell me how you would fight in the night and I will light that path." Her voice did not carry the music of the south nor the rough weight of the hills. It carried, Sansa would later say privately to herself, the sound of a woman speaking into wind and deciding not to let it have the last word. When she had finished, she looked to the men who had not been sure how to look at her. She let their eyes slide away from hers if they needed to, She did not snap them back on a hook. Then she sat, and the hall exhaled, and the work of eating and talking began again. And the musicians, 3 men with a harp and a drum and a pipe, found a tune that could live beneath the business of winter. After the worst of the hunger had been blunted and the first brave men had laughed in the places where ancient manners allow laughter, Sansa took her cue from the little clock she kept in her head and began to move among the benches. She knew who needed to be made important and who needed to be made invisible. She introduced the men from the Wolf's Den to Missandei, and watched with satisfaction as Missandei asked about seals and supply and the strength of small boats. She brought Lady Mormont to the high table, and the girl stood straight as a blade and promised 50 spears and 70 bows and a refusal to die until she had made dying an insult. Later, when the music had taken hold and men danced their stiffness out under ceiling beams black with old smoke, the queen excused herself from the head of the long table and walked out into the gallery. There were lamps there whose glass bells trapped heat and turned it back upon the stone, which the stone allowed grudgingly to hold for a brief while before giving it back. She touched the glass and it was warm. Outside the pictured windows the snow went on with its hushing. Jon joined her after a long nod to Davos and a short word to Bran that was more silence than word. He came with the sound of a boot on singing stone and stopped a step away from her shoulder, his hands loose at his sides, as if he had presented them to the winter and found them acceptable. "It wasn't so bad," he said, under his breath for them and no one else. "You have made worse dinners," she returned, and watched the small light in his mouth become something like a smile again. He took a breath as if to say more, and then turned his head at the cry of a raven. It was not the ordinary cracked cry. It was a hard, precise sound like something thrown. He looked outward automatically, reading the sky as a man learns to read his own hands. "Message," he said. "Messages are always flying here," she answered. "The sky is crowded with them. I think if I spoke aloud my thoughts, a raven would carry them to the snow and tell it to interpret me. And would it be right?" he said, and then shook his head a little as if to loosen the frost stuck to it. "Come, there's something I want to show you." They did not take a train of men. They went with Ghost's shadow sliding ahead of them in the corridor, and the guards at the inner gate making themselves briefly more noticeable so they might be noticed as unnecessary. She had never grown easy with the way the winter cold took her face as if it meant to keep it, but there was pleasure in stepping out into snow that had not yet been stepped in, and hearing the small squeak at each fall of foot. The dragons breathed small plumes in the further yard. The sky was darkness with no other texture. Once she had crossed a sea in a boat so small it had seemed to her to be only the courage of the men on it. The sky was like that sea. It would have swallowed a smaller courage. He led her to the outer wall and up onto it where the wind came with one hand full of knives and the other full of beauty. The world swung away from the walls in a circle of white. He set one hand on the stone, and she did the same. The stone was cold enough to make her gloves ache. "This," he said. She followed his gaze. The dragons had curled as cats curl if the hearth is pleasant and the day too long. Beyond them stood a line of tall cones no man had ever set with human hands. She had taken them for mounds of old plowed snow. Now, from this angle, she saw that each was a stack of dark glass caught up in winter, stacked in baskets and under sailcloth to keep the snow from eating away the work. Each piece of glass held more night than the night itself. "You've been busy," she said. He nodded. "Winterfell isn't suited to dragging stone. But there are men who know how to pack anything if you tell them what for," he said. The ships came to White Harbor, and from there they rode on sleds, and some of them tried the river and cursed me across it when the ice broke under them and they found themselves up to their waist in an argument. There was small pride in his voice, the pride of a boy who had set his hand to the making of something useful and found that his hand could make such a shape. "Gendry has been working in the smithy, teaching men how to shape it. I don't know if we'll have enough. I don't know what enough is. Do you, in your heart, believe in enough?" She did not say this to tease him. He thought a moment. He did not look away from the dark glass. "I believe in doing," he said at last. "Enough is a word men use when they are afraid to keep doing, or when they have burned the last of their kindling and must find a new way to stay alive," she said. this time with softness. You are a king raised by scarcity. He smiled at that because it was not quite wrong and not quite right in a way that pleased him. And you, I am a queen raised by hunger, she said. Her breath came out in a plume and the wind tore it from her face. I know what a little piece of meat will make a woman do. I know what a little piece of kindness will make a man do. He turned toward her then, his body hiding the worst of the wind. He was not a tall man, not like the statues, not like the men who needed to be monuments to be looked at. He was a man shaped for the work of standing in a doorway and letting the storm pass over him and not letting the children behind him feel it. His face had been marked by wind and stubbornness, and there was a line now at the corner of his mouth that had not been there when she first met him in the south, under other kinds of light. She had found that she loved that line because it had been put there by smiling. This is the last night we are only ourselves, he said. And tomorrow we will be. Stories, he said. And war. She had almost said something foolish, something like I am tired of being a story, and she was glad for once that these northern winters gave the tongue a little slowfulness so that words might be tested and not merely used. She took his hand, glove to glove, and felt through the layers the mark his sword had made on his palm for years. I would like to make a better story, she said. That's all. He nodded. We will do that. Promise me, she said. Not because she doubted he would, but because promises matter when spoken on a wall in a language the snow knows. I promise. They stood until the cold had a say, and then until it had said more than enough. And then they went in again, the dogs rising like a small tide and setting themselves back down when their boy with the long face had passed. In her chambers, a low fire had been laid and screens set around it to hold the heat, and there were bowls of broth flavored not with dragon but with the bones of small animals and onion and leeks. She drank half a bowl and found afterward that the taste of it would be the taste of that winter in her mouth. He sat beside the fire on a stool that had been mended 3 times. She liked that about this place, that it did not throw away things that were still good. Sansa came then, after knocking the soft knock that said she knew what intimacy demanded and offered up only what power required. She was wrapped in fur the color of the inside of an old pearl. She had the kind of careful balance in her that came of knowing which rooms were safe and how to make them safer if need be. It went well, she said. Could have been a question, but was not. It did, said Daenerys. They ate. They ate, Sansa acknowledged. Sometimes it is all one can manage to give people, and then it becomes everything. Jon rose for his sister, and the way he did it, respectful, unshowy, without a trace of the performance that had been taught into so many men, pleased Daenerys for reasons she could not entirely explain. Sansa sat, not near the fire, not far, precisely where she could have it if she needed it and could decline it if it spoke too loud. Letters, Sansa said, and looked at no one as Missandei came in quietly with a small basket lined with wool. From House Serwyn, House Dustin, and the Rills, and one from White Harbor that smells of smoke and salt and something like a fish that has made too many promises. Lord Manderley, said Davos, appearing behind Missandei like a man who had misplaced something and found it again. All his letters smell so. It is how one may tell that a letter is worth reading even when one is asleep in a chair. They read them. They read them there with fire making a soft island and snow pressing against the shutters with its quiet insistence. See, Erwin offered men. Dustin offered horses and suspicion. The Rills offered nothing but a name that was old and would not bow, and a threat that had not decided what it wanted to be. White Harbor offered ships and harbor and patience, and that patience smelled of smoke and salt and fish because patience always smells of the thing it lives beside. A tournament, said Sansa, setting one letter down and lifting another. They want to distract men, she said, and did not quite make it a question. The Manderleys say they will arrange a small festival on the harbor ice in 3 days if the weather holds. In 3 days the ice may not hold, Davos said, a veteran of all things that pretended to hold and did not. But men who make their living by guessing when something will break can be relied upon as long as they don't boast about the numbers. A tournament, Tyrion said, half amused, reading upside down easily as always. There is nothing more northern than putting men in armor upon skates and telling them to pretend the gods approve of the outcome. It isn't armor, Sansa said, a little smile. Not entirely. They call it splints. Leather and small plates. The old men who don't want to fight in the way of boys like it very much, as there is much pushing and not much dying. But we need something like it. Morale is a word that means courage plus bread. We have bread enough for now. We will need courage to stretch the bread. It is not the time for games, said Grey Worm quietly from the shadows. He had come as he always came, which was to say that no one noticed until he was there, and then it seemed obvious that he had been there all along. It is time for training and sleeping and guarding. It is time for all those things, said Daenerys softly, and no one missed how Grey Worm's head turned at the sound of her voice, as a man's head will turn toward a command that is also companionship. But a day is long enough to carry more than one weight. Let them have their festival. Put that fish smell to use. We will go and stand on the ice, and we will let them see our dragon's breath make steam. We will let the children touch Regal's shadow if he will mind me. We will feed them hot broth. They will remember it, and we will be worth remembering. Sansa nodded. She liked a plan that did not try to shame people out of their wanting. You will need clothes for it, she said briskly. I will have them ready. The night drew out its thread. Men and women came to the door with questions and left with answers or with a promise of an answer, which sometimes was better. They planned the distribution of firewood and of herbs that eased coughing. Missandei took notes in 3 languages because she had learned that writing something that might outlast a woman's first idea would be a kind of kindness. Bran said a thing that made them look up as they always did when a raven passed behind his words. They are nearer, he said, and then said nothing else for a quarter of an hour, and when he spoke again, he spoke of the way the roots under the castle spread like fingers into the dark and drank old stories. One could not rush him. The conversation adjusted itself around his silences as a river will go around the stones that refuse to move. Arya came and went, and once she leaned her forehead against her brother's shoulder and did not speak for a little while and then left again lighter in some way she did not show. Gendry arrived with soot in his eyebrows and excitement in his hands. He talked of glass and the strange manners of a substance you are meant to break when you are a boy and to preserve when you are a man. It wants to splinter, he said, but if you heat it and let it sit and then heat it again, putting it into ash to keep the worst of the heat and out again, it can learn its own shape. Like people, Missandei said, looking up from her papers, and Gendry looked at her and then away, and that was the beginning of something that would not break the wheel but would set a spoke in it. They went at last to the rooms that had been made into a small court and a small home. When the last of the footsteps had blurred into the deeper quiet and the fire's last coals were the kind of red that seeks turning, they sat again. He took off his gloves, one finger at a time. She removed the pins from her hair, and the ribbons came loose, and she felt the weight leave her scalp as a bird will feel a tether cut. He did not reach for her because he never did reach first. He waited for agreement, for the nod that says a woman is no longer at war with the day and ready to share what peace she has loosened from it. She went to him then. Their kiss was not an answer to anything. It was a place to gather breath. I expected more arguments, she said when she had her head in the angle of his neck. More standing up and shouting. More old men putting their hands on the table as if they meant to turn it over. More women rolling their eyes. They're tired, he said. Tired people save their anger for things that change something. They are not sure yet whether we will change anything. They will argue when they trust us. Then we will work for their anger, she said. And he made that face again, the welcome one, and kissed her temple. He slept as men sleep who have kept themselves awake for years, deep and sudden and without apology. She lay awake a while longer. Promises made in a god's garden run hot and fast. In the quiet of a room, they must learn to walk without stumbling. She had said she would be their fire and their bread. She had meant it, and meaning did not always keep terror out. She lay still and watched the shapes of furniture making their permanent arrangements on the walls, and listened to the wind recite some old story she did not quite know. When she dreamed of running fingers over stone so cold it burned, and of the sound of dragons breathing to keep a field warm while men lay under blankets and let themselves fall, and of a tree with a face whose mouth moved without sound as if it were trying to tell her the name for tomorrow. Morning brought a blue so pale it seemed bruised, and snow that had decided to attack in little gusts rather than with the quiet confidence of the day before. The castle had its own morning music, a rhythm of men on stairs, the slap of water into pails, the bark of a man who had woken dissatisfied and meant to keep the day in its place. The kitchen sent up smells that were not quite enticing, and Missandei's handwriting appeared on little notes pinned to the door for people who had lost or found things. And a boy ran past with a fist of letters in one hand and a roll of cheese in the other and was stopped by no fewer than 3 women who knew his mother and would tell her what he had done with his boots. They held court, which was to say that they sat and let men and women come to them and tell them what their lives required and what they had lost and what they had found. The first to come was a woman from a farmstead whose cow had fallen through a drift and broken a leg. She had the stunned look of someone who has said the same words 100 times in her head and now must hope they come out right this time. It was the best cow, she said, and then seemed ashamed for ranking them. Daenerys asked how many mouths the milk had served and how many winters the cow had seen. She asked if there were calves. Jon asked whether there were neighbors who might share their milk for a month in exchange for wood or help or meat. Davos asked about the man who did the mending in her hamlet. Between them, they built a thing that looked like a solution enough to lean on. A boy came who had stolen hard bread from a neighbor and broke before he could tell the lie he had meant to tell. Daenerys sent him to the kitchen with a note that said 4 things. Feed him first. Ask him to peel vegetables with a quiet hand. Tell him to bring me the peels, and find his neighbor and bring them both to me tomorrow. When the boy left, Missandei smiled down at the copy she made for the Book of Judgments. You are making a law, she said. One day it will be something you can write before you speak it. We should write them, Jon said. We should make a small book for this winter. Not big laws, just the things a man could hold in one hand. There is a simplicity to what we are doing, Tyrion murmured. Someone will eventually complicate it beyond recognition and call it the progress of civilization. Let them, Daenerys said. We need such people. Now we need walls and soup and the rules that go with walls and soup. A tanner came, and they made him promise not to tan within the least important courtyard. A girl came with a hawk on her wrist big as her forearm and asked if she could help with ravens. Bran's eyes turned for her, and she held that gaze without flinching. Grey Worm came to stand near the door when 3 men in black leather paused there too long as if they were inventorying the room. After a moment, the men realized their long pause had been noted and turned their faces into more honest shapes. At midday the light failed in a way it did not fail in the south. In the north it did not so much retreat as remember it had been meant to be somewhere else. Daenerys ate stew at the high table and found she liked the way they put dried apples in it to make the broth seem sweeter. And Jon leaned in so that the steam bathed his face and she wondered if he meant to borrow its heat or its scent. Sam arrived on the morning tide, Davos said, sitting down with a grunt and a bowl and a stack of parchment. He did not intend to read but wished to sit near so he might feel more like a man among thoughts. White Harbor sent him up with the first sleds. Sam came in snow-wet and delighted to be alive in his own body. He brought a book with a binding that had seen better wrists and a set of ideas he had been carrying not on his back but in his mouth. He knelt before Bran with a reverence that had nothing to do with crowns. When he rose, he hugged Jon with a suddenness that surprised them both, and then bowed to Daenerys with a kind of careful joy that made it more sincere than a gesture learned in a book. I found something, he said, as if this were new. He always found something. He laid the book out on the table and opened it to a page that looked as if 4 different hands had slapped it at different times. This is from a copy of a copy from a small house in the hills beyond the Trident, and I would not bet my life on it, but I would put a small coin on it to make an evening interesting. He smiled at his own metaphor and then went on quickly lest it be lost. It speaks of the way the old kings of Valyria took counsel in pairs, that there were days when a dragon lord's decisions could not be sealed unless his wind sister agreed. Wind sister, Missandei repeated, pleased. That is a word. It is, Sam said, and one I had not seen used of men and women who were kings and queens together. There are other mentions, too. In times of great crisis, a pestilence, a winter, in which the pairing was not only desirable but required. The writing is messy. The ideas are clear enough. There is power in two oaths if they are aligned. It makes for fewer mistakes. It may also make for delay, Tyrion said. The old kings rarely saw themselves as impediments to their own desires, and when two desire the same thing in different times. We will learn to desire in the same time, Daenerys said. She did not say it arrogantly. She said it as if stating the plan for the day's woodcutting. We will rub the iron of our thoughts together until sparks make a clean fire. Wind, sister, Jon murmured, testing it as he might test an edge. And wind, brother, then. It makes a kind of poetry of you, Arya said, appearing beside the table without sound and stealing a piece of dried apple from High's bowl and eating it with the insolent satisfaction of younger siblings everywhere. You will have to practice. They practiced, not the poetry or not just, but the work of two sovereigns occupying one outline. It was easier at first than it would later be when the spring made other demands of men and women's bodies, and when the ice in people's hearts began to melt and run in channels one could not always see. It was easier because the work was simple and repeated: feed, warm, arm, listen. They made a room theirs and put in it a large table, and on the table they laid all the things that would block light if left to themselves. Letters, plans, maps, a bag of coins, a boy's drawing of a dragon labeled with a name he had spelled in 3 different ways and none the same as she might have liked. They invited people into that room and told them to put their anger on the table beside the other things and to see how it might be arranged so that it would not block the light entirely. They walked the walls. They went into the barracks where the first thing a man sees is a rack for a wet cloak and the last thing he sees is a bench where he may sit and remember he is not dead yet. They visited the smithy. The heat, there was another kind of dragon, and the men leaned into it gratefully. Gendry showed them a new way he had found to shape the glass without letting it think itself into shards. He had learned to put the pieces into a bed of ash while the temperature fell and raised and fell. The ash speaks to it, he said, and then laughed at himself. Or so it seems to me. He put into Jon's hand a knife that had the look of night turned into a useful argument. He put into Daenerys's hand an arrowhead that might fit on the ends of children's spoons if one were a very bad person. She loved it. She thought of the narrow places in winter where a small thing can decide a day. Children followed the dragons as children will follow anything that is either extraordinarily large or extraordinarily gentle. The dragons were both. Rhaegal learned quickly that to blow heat upon a boy's hands just so would make the boy shout with joy and turn his palms like a flower toward him. Drogon learned to pretend he had not noticed when a child touched his tail. Viserion, whose temper had always been less easily read, kept to the edges of the yard, head cocked like a bird's when looking at a coin that might be valuable or might be a trick. He had never been a trickster among the 3. He had been a creature who loved the open the most. The walls were not a kindness to him. She would stand with him at the gate sometimes and let him stare toward the horizon, and say in the language she had learned with sun and water, soon, and meant it even when she did not know if it was a promise she could keep. When he breathed, the steam moved like silk in a dancer's hand. At White Harbor, the day of the festival dawned with that weak but earnest sunshine that made the ice into panes of light and gave men courage they had not earned. The harbor sang with voices and the creak of boats like great green creatures sleeping under the ice. Lord Manderley received them with his huge laugh, which was itself a kind of bread. He wore his pride like a good cloak, and his men stood around him with the relaxed attention of creatures who know their place under a whale's shelter. The ice had been tested by men with poles and by old women who trusted their own eyes. Held. Men in leather and small plates slid upon it with the grace of barrels and the determination of kings. Children with cheeks bright as liveried apples skated between them, and old men ate fish hot from pans and told lies about a winter twice as bad as this one which had not killed them either. They stood together on the ice, the dragons further off making a fog in which warm-blooded creatures moved and shouted and were grateful for the wet it made of their eyelashes. She stood with her gloved hand in Jon's and watched a boy go by on skates with a look of terror joined to a look of joy, a combination she recognized intimately. She watched men slide into one another and rise laughing, and women pushed children in small chairs over the ice, and the way care wove itself into a net that could keep a village from falling all at once. She listened to the gossip. It came like small birds, and it perched on conversation and flew off again and came back in its own time. She was wrapped warm. The dragons didn't burn anyone. He looked at me when I spoke. They ate the same fish we did. Do you see how she held the baby? As if she didn't mind. He's kind. She is not what I thought she was. He is exactly what I thought he was. She is colder in the way that a stone is colder than a blanket. She is warmer in the way that a lamp is warmer than a blanket. Truth and nonsense swapped places with reckless regularity. That was the way of gossip and the way of people. She liked the way the words moved. They had not always moved like this around her. They returned from White Harbor with cheeks flushed and with a list of grievances that had presented themselves beneath the pleasure of the day like bones under a smooth hill. They took them up the next morning. They did the work again. It was not new, but it had to be done every day or the day would do it for them poorly. When the first true sign came, a man running with a face half broken by cold, his knees turning outward like a puppet with bad strings, his mouth trying to shape a word that only decided what it would be when it turned into sound. It came without drama. He was from a village beyond the last hearth, a place with no name anyone in the room had ever heard. He had been a runner once, he said, when the broth got through the parts of him that had been bone, and he remembered his feet as things that had chosen him. Now he had chosen his feet. He told them of a place just beyond the trees where a path had always been passable on. Yesterday. The snow was wrong, he said. It's the kind that makes no sense to the eyes. When you step on it, it does not take you. You do not sink in. It's as if it would prefer you did not exist. They did not say, "You have seen the work of the dead." They did not need to. The air in the room turned as if someone had opened a window and allowed through it the smell of something that had died in a different season and wanted to come back to argue about it. John nodded, and Missandei wrote something that was not words into the margin of her paper. Later she would say she had written the shape fear had taken in the room, so she might recognize it if it entered again in a new cloak. Bran's eyes went further away, Arya's sharpened. Sansa closed down a part of her that could not be used in this work. They built a response as they had been building fire and soup. Scouts, signals, 3 long horn blasts from a tower. 1 long, 1 short, repeated, for a sighting of unknown nature. A way of walking the ice on the road that involved a rope that 2 men carried between them so they might feel together the thing they could not see. A great torch built in the yard they could drag onto the field and set. Not with 1 man's heat but with a score, and from which torches could be lit and passed hand to hand. A list of names of people in the outlying farms whose lamps had not been seen in the usual windows the usual nights. Children's games that were in fact drills. How fast a noise could travel. How fast a child could be gotten into a place with a door that shut. How many small hands could be taught to hold a rope together and not let go even if the rope thought itself a snake. When they slept that night, it was out of utter need. He lay on his back, 1 arm thrown up as if shielding his face from an imagined blow, and she lay with her face toward him and her hand flat on his chest, and anchoring. The next day the snow came in fat flakes that stuck to eyelashes and then melted and made the world a habit of blinking. The night after that, the temperature fell like a law being handed down by a judge who had not missed a meal in a month. It made metal sing and would shrink and faces stern. The day after that, Sansa laid out 3 cloaks and said to Daenerys, "Choose one that makes you feel like yourself," and then watched with quiet interest as she chose the one lined with red. "Yes," Sansa said, "that one," and tightened the belt with her own hands. "You do not need to look like us. We need to learn what it is to look like you." They began to speak High Valyrian at times in the halls, she and Jon, softly at first, the way new shoes are worn in by short walks. He had learned quickly. He had the ear for it that men often have when their tongues do not love words. He sang the bones of the language with a northern mouth and made no apology for it. Missandei corrected him gently. She corrected him mercilessly when he asked for it. He would say, "Wind sister?" in that language, and she would reply with the proper end of the word, and they would both smile, because love is partly the pleasure of listening to someone you like very well make a little mess of something that belongs to you and is not a mess when finished. They signed a charter, as Sam had thought best, that set the way decisions would be made while ice ruled. It was an honest, short thing, with room left on the page for the day when their needs became more complicated. "We do not need to become architects in a blizzard," Daenerys said. "We need to add supports that keep this roof from falling." Tyrion wrote it, and Missandei translated it, and Davos read it aloud in his trustworthy voice, and it was sealed with wax warmed by fire in a small clay dish made in a village where men made clay because they did not have stone. It held the mark of wolf and dragon both. The northern lords came to set their names to it, not with ease, but with the gravity that men give to a thing they will be judged by. Lady Mormont's name was clear, as if each letter had been a command. Lord Glover's was smaller than it might have been and placed nearer the margin than it needed to be. "He leaves room," Sansa said, "for an excuse." She did not sound angry. She sounded as if she had been left a puzzle in a language she knew how to read and would enjoy, in time, solving. On the fourth morning after that, the dragons woke restless. Rhaegal's head moved like a ship's at anchor dreaming of a wind. Drogon hissed at a corner of the sky where nothing showed. Viserion lifted his mouth and tasted the air, and then set one claw so carefully on the snow that each scale on his foot left its whole story there. Grey Worm ordered the Unsullied to their ready posts, crossbow, pike, the new glass tips laid out like a promise. The men with the ravens stood with their hands spread inside their gloves to keep the fingers from deciding to be someone else's. A boy came in out of the wind with his cloak upside down. He had been taught to check his cloak for ice before he entered a hall. He had been taught not to bring into a room what the room could not eat. He had not had time to remember the lesson. He had run across the yard with his mind ahead of his body, and his feet had rebelled and slapped the stones as feet will when they are asked to be more than they are. "A horn," he gasped, falling on one knee, and then remembering he was in a hall where men did not kneel for anything but something worth kneeling for, and rising with a blush that made him look like the flame of a hearth brought into a face. "3 blasts," he said, "from the north tower." The sound came through the stone then, the long, wide cry of a horn that had been made for cattle drives and for calling home a boy from the edge of a storm, and for the days when men put their hands on the shoulders of men they loved and told them, "I do not know what will happen next." One long, a short one after it like a held breath, then repeated, "You, known, unknown, unknown." The room did what a room does when a sound like that runs through it. Stilled. Directions pooled into certain people and ran from others. Jon did not hurry because there was no need to teach men to hurry by showing them how it was done badly. He put his gloves on one finger at a time. Daenerys tried to keep her hands from shaking and succeeded until she had to tie the last knot on her cloak. And then the knot took and the shaking went along with it. They moved out into the yard with a kind of grace neither remembered learning and both knew. It is a grace taught by old partings and by the relief of not parting. The dragons had already set themselves into a shape that made sense if you knew them. The eldest to the fore, the middle one where his strength would be most useful, the youngest a little to the side where he could move either behind or above. Drogon lifted his neck and made a sound that, to a man who had never heard it, would have meant horror and to them meant readiness. On the wall, the men at the horn were white-faced and stubborn. Snow blew around them as if it wished to make them into the ghosts of men before the work was done. The man who had blown the horn had not overdone it. His mouth had bled because the cold had split his lips and the horn had taken its payment. No one looked at the blood. Everyone looked at what lay on the field beyond the walls. It was not a mess. It was 2 figures, tall and thin in a way that did not belong to living men, and they stood at the edge of a drift and looked with the unblinking intensity of a creature that has not had to blink in centuries. They had no interest in the walls. They had come to look, to be seen, to be like the first sun that puts a finger through the window in summer and says, "Do you see that I am coming?" The snow around them did not move the way snow moves around the living. It moved as if it were remembering itself. Daenerys felt it again, that curiously domestic terror that comes upon a house when someone knocks and you know exactly who it is and what they want. She stood with Jon on the wall and let the winter look at her. She watched Jon put his hand on the hilt of his sword and felt the absurdity of the gesture from one angle and its complete aptness from another. A man is what he is. A sword is what a man has when even a dragon may not be enough. Do we answer? Tyrion said softly at her elbow. He had climbed the final step a moment behind them all, and the wind had taken the breath from him and then kindly given it back. We answer, she said, and started forward. Jon set his hand on her arm and then took it away because there was no point in stopping her, and all the points in going with her. The wall was too narrow for dragons, but the yard was not, and in the yard she climbed a ladder whose rungs were ice-slick and felt entirely like life, and then she was on Rhaegal's back and the world tightened into one curved line. She did not give the word most men would have expected. She did not scream a name as if calling upon a god. She spoke in the small voice of a woman speaking to a creature who had slept near her fire for years. Up, she said, and he went up. The sky was abite. The air resisted his wings and then took them. They lifted as if it would be easier to stop being anything at all than to stop rising. Below her the yard turned small, and the people on it became the pieces on a game board no one knows how to play until they must. She felt Jon take the place beside her, and when she looked, Rhaegal turned his eye to look too and let her see the green-black flash of Drogon's wing. Viserion went higher, happier for height. She loved him for that brief happiness, for that gift that would be something to keep on a day when keeping would be hard. They did not go high enough to forget the walls. They went high enough to see the line of trees where the snow had paused to decide how to fall. They went high enough to be the answer to a question men had not known how to ask. She did not have to tell Rhaegal where to look. He saw them. The two figures did not move. They did not lift a hand. They looked directly at her. She was no longer in a hall or in a room with screens around a fire. She was no longer anywhere men had made. She was in something older than that, a piece of air held between two ideas, and the ideas had faces that were not faces. She urged Rhaegal forward and felt him resist in that way he had when the sky told him something it had not told her. Steady, she said, and he steadied. With me. Sometimes the only word that counts is with. They hovered above the field, and the cold bit even through the thickness of her clothes and through the heat beneath her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed down to the exact space between her eyes and the eyes of the thing below and to a single memory. A house with doors that opened inward, an old man feeding dogs before he fed himself, and the first time she had sat on a saddle and learned how a life can be held between thighs and fingers. She breathed out. Rhaegal breathed with her. She did not give the word for fire. She did not turn the snow to steam, the ice to rain. She did not ask him to kill anything. She asked him to speak. Rhaegal opened his mouth and let out a sound that had nothing to do with rage or meat. It was a call. It rolled off the field and onto the wall and into the mouths and chests of men and then back again because the field gave nothing back willingly. The sound was a statement, and the statement was, "This air is also ours." The figures below were unmoved, which is not to say they did not feel it. In their terrible quiet she felt for the first time a curious thing. Their patience. They had waited forever for what they wanted. They could wait one more day. She knew then that haste would be the mistake that would kill more than any sword. She reached forward and put her hand down the long curve of Rhaegal's neck, and felt the ridges of scale and the heat there, and in that moment she set something in herself like a bolt set into a door. We will not run headlong into the dark. We will make the dark come to us in the way we require of it. She turned Rhaegal with a small pressure. Drogon matched them. Viserion turned last, his eyes reluctant to leave the edge of the world. When they were back on the yard stones, she slid from the saddle to a world that seemed too flat for a moment. The wind kept its mind. The men on the ground had altered theirs. The horn did not sound again. The boy who had run in earlier stood now with his hands stiff as sticks at his sides and his mouth set and his eyes wide in a way that meant he might talk about this day for the rest of his life, and all his sons would grow tired of it and be grateful for tiredness. "They wanted you to see them," Tyrion said. "They wanted to see us," she answered. "We obliged one another. Is that courtesy?" Davos said. "Or war?" "Both," Jon said. "Today both. Tomorrow. We will make tomorrow," she said. and let the word settle with the snow. They drew maps again that night. They spoke of lines and fires and the way the wind might favor one side or another, and for the first time in the days since the Godswood ceremony, there was no time to talk of bread except as fuel for men, and men as fuel for a plan that could not afford to waste them. Arms were counted. The glass that had been made was counted. The small blessings were counted. A woman from the village with no name beyond the last hearth had a song that kept babies quiet. A man in the yard could look at a sky and tell within an hour whether a squall would become a storm. These were the kinds of things that made the difference between living men and dead ones. In the long hours when the candles had run to pools and the wicked little stubs of them put out more stubborn smoke than light, they were not king and queen but two tired people with most of their strength cut down to the bone. She took his hand across the maps. He put his forehead to the back of her knuckles and rested there as a heavy bird will rest on a wrist that takes it. They spoke little. They had said enough for today. There would be a chance to say more tomorrow if they made it, and if speech did not turn itself into a luxury they could not afford. She slept then and dreamed of a garden in a city where there had never been snow, and of a fountain that held a dragon drinking, and of the stone under the dragon's feet warm enough to lie on. When she woke, there was a sound in the corridors like the bland sound of people who have decided to live anyway. A sound she trusted now more than any trumpet. Jean rose and went to the window and opened it a fraction to let the morning in. It came in stinging and then softened as it moved through the heat of the room and became breath. He stood there, and she watched his back and thought, I will have to remember this exactly, the way his shoulders look when the day comes to him. I will have to be able to recall this without mistake if I survive him or he me. She had learned, in a short and brutal life, that memory is the only currency that does not lose its value when kings fail. He turned, and the look on his face was not the look she knew, which was the look of a man who had built himself a fence against hope and put a gate in it anyway. This was something else. What? She said. He did not speak for a heartbeat because the word wanted more blood. Ravens, he said. From the south. A letter. Many, he said. He did not scowl, though the weather on his face almost did it for him. He did not like to be pulled into another, whether when the one he was in required all of him. They say Cersei sits in King's Landing and counts men she does not have and sends them out in the shape of turned words. They say Euron Greyjoy has moved ships from here to there to pretend a distraction, and to make a man in need of food send a cart toward his mouth. He breathed and made of that breath a decision. They ask for an answer. She had expected it. She had not wanted it today. She sat and felt the cold run up her back into her scalp. We will answer, she said at last. We will write to them, and we will send men of plain speech, so the words cannot be chewed into another shape. And we will not send any more than we must take away from this place. We will tell them that when a house is burning, the neighbors bring water first and argue later about the pitcher. Missandei smiled without moving her mouth. It was a talent she had. I will write it, she said, and then you will say it differently and better, and I will write that as well. Tyrion, who had entered so quietly that she could have sworn his short legs made no sound, nodded. He had learned, very slowly and with more pain than a man like him should have had to know, that some wars are won by refusing to acknowledge their rules. Let them come or not come then, he said. Let them make their comedy. It is not comedy that kills men, Davos said. It is pride dressed like a friend. They sent the ravens. They sent letters written in a hand that meant business, and in a language that could be understood by men who had learned to make sense of more than two weather vanes. They sent the news of what they had seen and what they meant to do about it. They did not beg. They did not offer gold. They did not flatter. They did not promise rewards other than not dying. It is a hard promise to translate into the tongue of courts. They sent also a small letter to a small place by the Trident where a woman with hair the color of standing hay had encountered them on the road in some other year and had given them hot wine and a bed for an hour. Said, if you have strength to leave, leave now. South, always south. She did not know if it would reach the woman. She wrote it anyway. Writing sometimes is the only mercy one can afford. In the tea that followed, they locked their door and allowed themselves 1 hour to be people again. People who did not look like kings to one another. People who, when the hour was done, would set their crowns back upon their heads with steady hands. He put his forehead to hers, and the two of them breathed like two beasts in a cave, teaching each other what warmth is. He rested his hands on her shoulders. A blessing, a thanks, a claim, a question. She pressed her mouth to the place in his throat where a man's life beats loudest, and thought for the briefest frivolous moment that if the world were as it should be, she would have learned all the names of the muscles in that place and taught them to children so that they could grow up loving the way a person is made and not merely what a person can do for a king. She did not cry. She could have. The tears were there like water behind a dam that has been tested and tested again. She thought of her brother and of all the names that had been taken from her like coins from a layman's purse. She thought of her dragons and of how one can be both a creature and a country for another creature and a country to stand upon. She thought of the word wind sister and of how words are made when the world is cracked and men must pour them into the fissures and hope they keep a shape. They went out again. They went out to the training yards and to the walls and to the greenhouse that Winterfell had somehow managed to preserve against the worst of the cold. A building that smelled of humid leaves and that made her briefly, almost painfully, homesick for a place she had never truly owned. She stood among the green things and stroked the leaf of something like mint and thought, "This is what we are trying to do. We are trying to make the air bear fruit." Jon reached over her to pluck a sprig and rub it between his fingers and hold it under her nose. "This," his gesture said, "is what we will not give up to the dead." When the first real fight came, it did not come in the field where the two figures had stood. It came in a small ravine to the west where men had always hunted in lean winters as wolves hunt, by waiting, and by making themselves plenty when there is not plenty. It came with noise and with silence, as wars do, the two of them taking turns at the front of the procession. Men died and men did not die, and the reasons for each were not simple. A spear of glass went through the breast of a creature who had not been a creature yesterday, and it slept, and a woman in a brown cloak who had been a mother yesterday and a fighter today put her face to her hands and made a sound that more than one man in the ravine would hear next winter when he woke to the wind. They drove them back. A small knot, a scout's party perhaps, and in driving them back, they learned one more set of things that would save them in the next hour and the next. Back at the walls, they did not cheer. They did not think they had won anything but time. They did what men do when they have asked their bodies to be the last argument and those bodies have almost refused. They sat. They ate. They cleaned their hands. They told the smallest of jokes. They took off a boot. They stood up too quickly and sat down again and blamed the action on something other than the trembling in their knees. They put the dead in a place where they would not trouble the living, and they spoke the words that men have said for a long time so that those words might have something to do besides sit in books and remind men of a god's hobby horses. She moved among them as a queen who intends to be a mother walks among children who are not hers but who will call her as such if she gets this next hour right and the next after that. She touched a shoulder. She asked a name. She handed a cup. She said, "Thank you," many times. She said, "Rest now," fewer times and with greater force. She went to the infirmary with Missandei, where a woman with hands like twigs gently taught another woman how to set a splint with cloth that had been boiled and boiled again until all its past had been washed out of it. Jon went to the courtyard and watched Gendry show 20 boys twice his weight how to keep their hands around the shaft of a spear when fear tells the fingers to turn into worms and escape. He said nothing. He nodded when a nod mattered. He was the kind of king a man stands straighter for without being told why. Night fell as if it had been dropped. The dragons did not sleep. They lay with their heads curled to their sides and their eyes open and their breaths coming at regular intervals. And each breath put a small piece of control back into the air that had wanted it for itself. The moon was a smear. The cold had reset its ambitions upward. On the wall, men shifted from foot to foot and wished it were a thing you could do without moving for fear of the way movement lets the cold into joints and thereby into a man's thoughts. It had been some days, by then, since the godswood had seen them take their vows. It might have been an age, except that ages have the habit of smoothing their own edges, and the edges of these days were not smooth. Daenerys thought of the face in the heart tree, and in thinking of it, she found that she wanted, not for the first time, but for the first time with urgency, to speak aloud to a god that had not been hers and might be no one's. She went there alone, without men behind her and without a thing in her hands except her hands. And she stood before the tree and said the truest thing she knew. Help. She felt foolish, then less foolish, then something like content. The help came, of course, in the shape of the work to be done, which is the only shape it ever takes. It came as a small clarity, an idea about how to place the barrels in the east yard and about the use of old iron chains that had been left there by a man who had intended to fix a gate and had instead grown old and then older. Use them to pull the fur. She said to John when she found him again. The way a woman will say a small thing at the end of a long day and put her hand briefly on the back of a man she trusts. He looked at her and saw her whole, and saw how she shook only a little, enough to be marked as human and not so much as to be unfit for the work. He took her hand and set it under his mouth, and the bottom of his jaw rested on the heel of her palm, as if she were the thing keeping his head on his neck. And perhaps she was. They did not know when the day would come when they would have to spend everything they had stored. Men seldom do. They only knew that it would, and that the dragon's breath would be spent and the glass would be splintered and the walls would be asked to remember everything that made them walls, and that when it was over, the food would taste different. It would taste like relief laced with salt. On what passed for the eve of that day, they stood on the battlements again. The snow came down silently, with the dignity of an old mourner. The lanterns along the wall had been freshly trimmed. Below, the yard made its low noises, the clink of a buckle, the mutter of a soldier who has found his favorite place to lean, the whisper of straw being shifted under a sleeping boy so he would not wake in misery. Regal's shadow moved slowly along the inner ground and then was still. "You've made a kingdom," John said, almost teasing, and nodded toward the evidence. A row of stacked firewood, a corrected map with careful new hand-drawn ink, a boy carrying a pot that would be emptied and then filled. "So have you," she said. "Together," he said. "As true Targaryens," she answered, the words not a boast but a definition. He blew out a breath. It made steam that joined the night. "They will have to learn it in their mouths," he said. "As we did." "They will," she said, "and in their bones, and if we live, in their children." He looked sideways at her then, and the line at his mouth softened in that way she knew. He did not make a joke. He was not a man who risked humor when a hope would do. "We may have those," he said. She did not look away. "We may," she said, not because she thought she could command such a gift or because she imagined the gods a kind of clerk making notes on a queen's accounts, but because she had decided that to say the word and mean it was to put it out in front of the day and watch it walk. "Stay with me," he said low. "Today," she said. "Tomorrow, until the word ends." The horns did not sound again that night. The dead did not come to the edge of the field and look up with their old patience. The snow did what snow does, which is to remake the world into a place where everything looks like a possibility. When they went to their beds, they slept because they had trained themselves into sleep. When they woke, it was because it was time. In the morning, a messenger came to the yard from the east gate. He was winded. He did not kneel. He put his hands on his knees and looked up and said, because he had been taught by a woman with hair the color of standing hay and because he had learned by doing, "It is time." And outside the walls, beyond the far field, where the horizon had always pretended to be something stable that a man might love, a line moved. The line was not black. It was the color of snow and the absence of breath. It moved like a slow-sprung trap. The dragons lifted their heads. The wolves in the kennels lifted theirs. The men at the horn looked at one another with faces that had not been strangers for some time now and waited as one waits at the edge of a door one has unlatched. She took his hand, and he took hers. They went forward, and everything in the day went with them. The snow began to fall in larger flakes. The world's breath was held. The first cry went up, and the second, and the third. They stood and did not break. They were the point of a spear made of wood and iron and hope, and behind them the whole of winter leaned and did not snap.